Without a shadow of a doubt, it has been a very, very uncomfortable Christmas for Boris Johnson, certainly in the Downing Street flat this year, despite how nice the new wallpaper on the walls may look. There is indeed, shall we say, the cracks behind the wallpaper are already indeed starting to show. Normally, during this time, it is an incredibly quiet period, but we know just from the fact of how Omicron is going, we know that there has to be tougher rules, but we also know that many of the Conservatives are so ideologically opposed to any more further lockdowns or anything like that, even though there is something in the pipe coming down. They are so opposed to it. It shocks you beyond belief that there are these very obvious public health safety measures, and yet they are so ideologically opposed to measures that we know have worked, that have even worked historically, that we've done for years, and yet for now, for some reason, we oppose them. Can't have that. Can't have that at all. This is beyond belief, and it is getting to the point now whether these, shall we say Boris's rivals are going to, start to, close the net around Boris. I think that is very much the pattern of what might happen in the next couple of weeks. But as I always say, you never know what could happen in politics. And obviously, this is generally the quiet period between now and New Year. So, with that said, let's go diving into this article. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button down below. And of course, there are links to my Patreon page and, of course, Buy Me Coffee, the One of Today's link, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who support the channel that way. And of course, the YouTube memberships are open as well. As you can see, I'm trying something a bit new. So if you like this, let me know. Like I say, just trying a new layout, see what you think to it. So let's dive into this then. So this comes from The Guardian. The title of "With Christmas cheer over, the PM now confronts a very sullen and angry cabinet." The space between Christmas and New Year is normally treated pretty sacred in political circles. There are very few modest, pre-prepared government and opposition announcements to keep journalists in business while everyone else switches off and remembers what their family looks like. Not so this year. In the next few days, there will most likely be a cabinet meeting, albeit one on Zoom, to discuss whether England needs more restrictions to stop the spread of Omicron. After nearly 2 years of Zoom meetings, everyone is well aware of how hard it is to read the room in the room of a group of people through a computer screen. Some of Boris Johnson's problems with his party have stemmed from the lack of real contact between the Prime Minister and the MPs. And it hasn't helped that the internet in Downing Street is about as reliable as Johnson's commitment to being straight with people. But even with the Wi-Fi signal is strong, the Prime Minister has failed to read the virtual room, and has been often ploughed ahead with jokes and upbeat speeches while his colleagues have stared discontently at their screens. But Johnson can't have failed to read the notice at the mood on this cabinet calls is now very different than just a couple of months ago. It is not that the internet connection is breaking things up, but his relationships with his very own ministers, of some who used to be very happy to support and cheer him along, now the mood has soured. And the next Zoom call will be a very tense affair, and not just because that there is a split in the MP's top team, or whether to shut down more parties of society again, or to keep Omicron under control. His own authority is now in question too. Last week's cabinet felt very differently, partly because of the very copious absence of Lord Frost, who had sensationally resigned over the weekend. It also, according to those taking part, it was very mildly upsetting because Johnson wanted to hear what they thought and didn't seem very confident about making a decision. The ministers most sceptical about the wisdom for more restrictions also felt safe enough to push Johnson on whether he had enough data and whether the modelling on how infections might spread was right. Not only is this the Prime Minister a week after months of political mistakes and easily the biggest Commons revolt of his leadership on vaccines passports, but the cabinet ministers are now also aware that their colleagues on the backbenches want them to be more challenging. So they can't afford any further mistakes in the new year. It is also no coincidence that the two most outspoken ministers against early restrictions last week were also the two prominent leadership contenders, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Both have been very busily courting backbenchers while starting to try and build their own campaigns for the top job. All this canvassing works means that they've got to get a much better grasp of how Tory MPs are feeling than Johnson does. They also know that there is a growing anxiety that the Conservative Party is becoming one of senior Tory ones is a patrician COVID state party that signs off more curbs on people's freedoms, partly out of fear that it could knock over the very fragile NHS at any moment. Sunak has also the added frustration of having to find more and more funding for the health service, while businesses whose activities ended up funding the NHS through taxation keep struggling because of the ongoing uncertainty and the ongoing nature of the restrictions. Kirsty Katang, the business secretary, has very similar concerns and has been increasingly resistant to more curbs. He and his junior ministers have often overstepped the government line in the media interviews to try and push policy in their direction. There are very few consequences against going against the agreed line, not least because there is always a line to break. Mind you, recently there has been some sort of miracle that any minister agrees to go out. That has been any rarely has minister agrees to go out and do media at all. On some of the worst days of the rows about the Downing Street Christmas parties, the cabinet were nowhere to be seen. It was just also indefensible behaviour at the heart of these stories, but also that Johnson has squandered a great deal of loyalty among his ministers over the preceding months. Take Grant Shapps. He has long been known as someone who would happily go to any broadcast outlet and bat for the government. But allies of the normally triggerish Transport Secretary say he's felt very badly burnt recently by the way Downing Street managed to botch the briefing of the government's integrated rail plan, so that the 96 billion programme of upgrades ended up something like swinging cuts to the railways. The chief whip, Mark Spencer, isn't even all that visible in the media, but his efforts to try and defend the Prime Minister to the rest of the party haven't gone without any real thanks. Indeed, Johnson has left Spencer feeling humiliated and in recent months making him sack a junior ministerial aide, Angela Richardson, over a refusal to support his attempt to overhaul the parliamentary standards regime and help Owen Paterson escape his punishment for breaking the lobbying rules. Spencer had then the grim task of reinstating Richardson 24 hours later. Boris shot Mark in the head, says one pal of Spencer's. The chief backed him all the way through the leadership, all the way last week, and Spencer saw more Downing Street briefings against him as Johnson still blames the chief whip for persuading him to try and get Paterson off the hook in the first place. Many other MPs point out that Johnson can't blame Spencer for his own failure to read the absolutely damaging report about Paterson. But there is still very little trust or even affection between the Prime Minister and the man who is supposed to be his top enforcer. Jacob Rees-Mogg is yet another recipient of hostile briefings from Number 10. He could leave the cabinet in a mini reshuffle in the new year, but that's only if things go to plan for Johnson. Currently, the bigger risk is that the leader of the House resigns before then, having also been made to look a fool during the Paterson row and now anxious about the COVID restrictions. Many other ministers who aren't going anywhere or nevertheless frustrated say that they've had to go out and clarify things about the Prime Minister has said, who's supposed to be a natural communicator and has made a mess of a number of them, have had to damp down a now furious row in the party sparked by Johnson thinking aloud about a, quote, national conversation about mandatory vaccines. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, was the one who managed to stop a backbench rebellion by ruling out this policy. But it left many of the middle-of-the-road Conservatives wondering just what was going on if the Prime Minister had to rely on Javid, quite a dry character, to try and clarify his own words. What Johnson does have are a very few genuine loyalists now left at his top table. The Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, is the fiercest among them and was recently booted from the WhatsApp group by fellow Tory MPs for telling her colleagues to give the PM more credit. But Even those who are quite comfortable with more COVID restrictions are still milking it for their leader's current weakness. The Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, again, it's been a while since we've heard anything from Michael Gove and anything to do with levelling up, has been a bit of a standoff with Sunak over the amount of money that he wants to commit to infrastructure, housing, and other projects in the North and the Midlands. But colleagues who also suspect he has delayed his big levelling up white paper, partly because he knows that waiting a little longer will mean that the Prime Minister is weaker and will have to give in to more of his demands. And of course, ministers always try and play games to get their own way. But normally the Downing Street operation is very strong and effective to try and spot these sort of tactics and at least deal with them. The risk at the moment is, of course, that Johnson is so weak and distracted that he and his team don't realise how many colleagues aren't really on his side anymore, and they don't have the withdrawal to do anything about it. The aggravating factor for all this is that the Labour Party is now starting to make more of an impression. Having been on mute for months, Keir Starmer's new look shadow cabinet is louder, more professional, and quicker to respond to ministerial counterparts. Johnson doesn't have that much room to mess up as he did just a few months ago. But the bulk of the pressure is coming from within his own cabinet. And even when they are all back together and around the traditional boat-shaped Downing Street table, proceedings will be very awkward until Johnson works out how to fix his broken connection. So, as you can see, things are really not going to go well, and it's all going to kick off in the new year. This is the direction that everything has been pointing so far, and especially last month. And the North Shropshire by-election win just made things, I think, even worse for Johnson. And, it's the question of not if Johnson goes, it's when. Johnson now is in a weaker position than he ever was. And if rumor is to go, as we've seen from Michael Gove's very own levelling up white paper, wanting to push Rishi Sunak for more money, that white paper, when that comes out, if it does show that, again, there isn't enough money to properly level up the North, which Michael Gove will very happily kick the boot in, bang goes yet another Johnson promise. All those red wall MPs who all that promised money was meant to be going for will again not be very happy. And we've talked about their dissatisfaction at the moment among those red wall MPs. So, things are not going to go well for Boris Johnson. I think that things are going to go wrong more quickly than Boris Johnson would like. And I think that this is going to be a simple case of, the car has spun out and it's far too late to try and, shall we say, do any course correction. The only thing they've got to do left is abandon ship and jump out. But the question is who goes first? Do you kick the driver or do you get out yourself? That's the big question. I think a lot of ministers and even his top cabinet members are now asking themselves. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for you watching. I hope you liked this new format and trying out. Let me know if you liked it or not. But yeah, thanks all for watching, and we'll see you all next time.